Okay, so let's start. Welcome back after the weekend. And so this is these lectures are after some gap, right? We get 4 5 days off, and so let's start back. So we are in chapter one of Rudin, and today we will finish chapter one, and in the next lecture we will start chapter two. Okay, so let us uh, start sharing the screen. Let me start sharing the screen. And as usual, one of you can please confirm that you can see.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So lecture 4, and what is the keyword today? The keyword is almost everywhere. What does this mean? By the way, this is
Over
no, today is not August 11th, right? Today is 10th, no?
11, sir.
Today is 11th?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
yes, it's relevant.
fine. So almost everywhere, what does that mean?
True in a measurable set with measure non-zero. Like,
I'm not sure what you said is
Every
correct. Just repeat.
everywhere, but not at the set of major
Yeah,
zero.
yeah, it's true everywhere, possibly except a set of measure zero. Okay, so it's almost everywhere true, meaning where something is not true is negligible, meaning it has measure zero. Okay, so this is the last topic of this chapter. We will see many results, small results, where we can conclude some things only almost everywhere. For example, even in Riemann integration, right? I mean, if you have a curve and area under the curve is the integral, definite integral, and at 1 or 2 points, if the function takes different value, the integral doesn't change, right? Integral does not depend on a finite number of values or maybe even a countable number of values, right? Area does not change, no? If you change
Yes,
the function at so that means integral does not really depend on all the values. Okay, so something similar, much more generally. So let us go through this. So last class we proved many things, but importantly these named results: monotone convergence theorem, Fato's lemma, and dominated convergence theorem. Quickly recall. So what was MCT? All these results are about limits, right? MCT and DCT will tell you that you can change the order of limit and integration. And Fato's lemma was an inequality which was about lim-inf. So what was MCT? What was the condition under which you can change the order of integration? Order of limit and integral.
The sequence of measurable functions are monotonic
The
increasing,
sequence
and
of
then
measurable functions is monotonic increasing. Then you can change. And in DCT, the sequence of
all
functions,
the
all of them are
bounded by a measurable
dominated
some
by
L1
function.
L1
an
function.
L1 function, an L1 real valued function. Okay, and then also we could change. And Fato's lemma was an inequality about lim-inf, integral of lim-inf and lim-inf of integral. Which one was the lesser one?
Limit inside is less than limit outside.
Integral of lim-inf is less than or equal to lim-inf of integral. Okay, good.
Yes, yes.
So what was the main idea of proof of MCT? What was the structure of the proof? There were two parts, and which was easy and which was tough. Not tough, but we did a bit more work. So what you know is F1 less than or
Construction
equal to,
about
yeah.
En.
So what you know is F1 less than or equal to F2 less than or equal to etc. Applying integral, you get integral of F1 less than or equal to integral of F2 less than or equal to etc. That will have a limit, right? That will have a limit. So
Yes,
that is limit of integral Fn. And is that what we called alpha?
mm, yes.
Okay, if
Yes,
that is
Yes,
alpha, then you know that integral of Fn is less than or equal to integral of f, right? Because everything is It's monotonic
Sir.
increasing and limit is f. Yeah.
Sir, are you recording?
I think I am recording. Yes. You can't see that banner. I will double check since you told me. Yeah, it says stop recording, which means I'm recording. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, no, we don't have information. That's
I think the banner comes and then the banner goes away maybe, but somewhere
Yes,
you
yes.
should be able to still see, recording. Can't you see a red dot on the left
Oh, yes,
top?
yes,
Left?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And that time you can see 9 minutes something. I think that's a recording button. But
Yes.
good that you point out, because sometimes I might forget. So if this limit integral fn, if you call alpha, each of integral fn is less than or equal to f, integral of f. So limit is also less than or equal to integral of f, right? So what you easily get is alpha is less than or equal to integral of f. What do you have to show?
Reverse inequality.
Yeah, you have to show that these are equal. So you have to show alpha is bigger than or equal to integral of f, and there we used a trick. What was the main idea? See, I am recalling all this easily because only last week we did this. Okay, next year if you ask me, maybe I won't recall. But anyway, yeah. So that's why I am trying to recall in a good way, because I myself, this recalling is for myself actually. I would like to try to remember as much as possible. So yeah, what was the main idea? So you want to show that alpha is bigger than or equal to integral of f, and integral of f is defined in terms of integral of.
Limit of.
True, but integral of f, what is the definition of integral of f? It is supremum over
all the simple functions which are
integral of
less
s.
than or
So,
equals.
correct. So it's enough to show that alpha is bigger than or equal to integral of s for all s less than or equal to f. And what was the next step? In order to show this, it is enough to show you can fix a c between 0 and 1, and it is enough to show that alpha is bigger than or equal to c times integral of s. And then we used a nice idea, which is you define certain sets. We called it En, and what was the set? So what you are trying to get is integral of f is bigger than or equal to c times integral of s, and f is limit of fn. So you take those sets where fn is bigger than or equal to c times sx. Fn of x is bigger than or equal to c times sx. Those sets we call En. And what did we observe about this sets En? These are monotonic increasing and ascending sets, and union is
Limit of.
union of these sets is
X.
the full set x, and therefore you know that for any positive measure of x is limit of measure of En. Agree? Because these are increasing sets, and we proved this earlier. So measure of En will converge to measure of x, and then we chose a measure. What was the choice of our measure? Phi of E is given as you don't recall? Right, this much is okay. Measure of x is limit of measure of En, and in order to finish the proof, we chose a particular measure and applied it there. What was that measure?
SD mu.
SD mu, right? Phi of E is integral over E SD mu. So what is phi of En? Integral over En SD mu, and phi of x is integral over x SD mu. So when we apply this, what do you get? When you apply this measure of x, which is integral over integral over x s d mu, right? Integral over, on s only we are applying, no? So integral over x s d mu, that is phi of x, which is limit of measure of En, which is integral over En s d mu, right? But integral over En S d mu, what can you say? Now, what are we trying to show? We are trying to show alpha is, yeah, we were planning to show that alpha is bigger than or equal to integral c times integral of Sx, right? That's what we are trying. So, are we taking S d mu or F d mu as a measure?
F
F,
F d mu.
F,
F
F,
d mu.
F d mu, F d mu. So phi of x is integral F d mu over x, and this is bigger than or equal to integral F d mu over En, right? Because the limit is this, and it's an increasing sequence. And integral of are we doing it over?
No, sir. We are doing it over S and then
S
take
okay,
Superman.
okay. So let us do it once again. So integral over S d mu, integral over x S d mu. This will be bigger than or equal to integral over, what am I missing? This is limit of phi of En. So this is limit of integral S d mu over En, right?
Yes.
And what can you say about this? Because over En, what do we know? En is those elements where Fn is bigger than or equal to
CFX.
C times S, no?
Yes, yes,
C times
yes, yes.
S. So now you have integral over S d mu over En, and what am I missing? Integral over S d mu over En, and can one of you just check last lecture? So over En, my condition is Fn is bigger than Cs, right?
Yes.
So maybe I should start with alpha. Alpha is integral over F d mu, right? No, alpha is limit of integral
Fn.
over Fn. Limit of integral over Fn. So alpha is bigger than or equal to integral of Fn, no? Because it's an increasing sequence, right? Alpha is bigger than or equal to integral of Fn and over x, and this is bigger than or equal to integral over En of Fn, and over En Fn is bigger than or equal to Cs. Yeah, so that's correct. So therefore you will get C times integral of S d mu.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what you wanted. Alpha is bigger than C times integral S d mu. So this was the proof of MCT. It took more time than what I thought. I got stuck in the very last step, and this proves MCT. And what was the idea of Fato's lemma?
To
By the
take
way, via MCT, via multiple applications, you got interchanging result. Okay, that I am not recalling, which we will use today. And Fato's lemma, you start with integral of lim inf, and you want to show it's less than or equal to lim inf of the integral. What was the main idea? Yeah, you apply the definition of lim inf. Lim inf
yes.
of Fn is supremum of a sequence gk, which is same as limit of gk. And
Yes.
those gk's you could have
Are
applied MCT because
increasing.
they are monotonic
Increasing.
increasing.
Yes.
So then everything follows, right? Because then you will write integral of lim inf as integral of limit gk, which is limit of integral gk, but limit of integral gk, because limit exists,
Same.
therefore that is same as lim inf. So you will get lim inf of integral gn, but gn is less than or equal to fn, so lim
So
inf is
that
less than or equal to lim inf of fn. So that's good. Fato's lemma is done. And DCT, what was the main idea? You have this function g which is dominating, and you have all these fn. Yeah, so what we proved is limit of integral of mod fn minus f is 0, right?
Yes.
And from that, the other result will easily follow by applying modulus of integral is less than or equal to integral of modulus. So what you have to show is limit of integral mod fn minus f is 0, and for which we did something about lim sup, right? We showed that the lim sup of this is 0. Yeah? Lim
Yes.
sup of integral
Yes.
mod fn minus f is 0, for which we need only to say that lim sup of mod fn minus f is less than or equal to 0.
Yes.
Guess now.
Yes. So that's what we have to show, and this will automatically follow by applying Fato's lemma to which sequence of functions? See, what you have to observe is mod fn minus f, that anyway you have to consider that is less than or equal to 2g by triangle
Yes.
inequality, and therefore we considered the positive functions 2g minus mod fn minus f and apply Fato's lemma to this sequence, and dct will follow. Okay, so I took
Yes.
more time than what I wanted, but this was what we did last time. And today we will discuss the role played by sets of measure 0. So let's start. So this is the definition that you recalled already, that two measurable functions f and g agree almost everywhere if the set of points where they differ, those x where fx is not equal to gx, that set as measure 0, meaning it's negligible. Okay, so this is the definition, and this is denoted by f tilde g. And the first observation is this is an equivalence relation. So you check that reflexive, symmetric, transitive, and that I leave. And what we can observe is if f and g agree almost everywhere, then for any measurable set, what can you say about the integral of f and integral of g on E?
Equal.
Equal. And what is the proof? Because where they
Take
agree,
out.
yes,
Take.
mostly they agree. Where they don't agree is a set of measure 0.
Yes.
So integral over f can be written as integral over f over the set where they agree plus integral over f over the set they don't agree. And but if you integrate on a set of measure 0, then the answer is 0. So they similarly for integral g also. So they agree. This is easy. And a subset of a set of measure 0 will have measure 0. Is that true?
Is subset of set 0.
What
Yes.
you know
Yes.
is if A and B are measurable,
Yes, sir.
and if A is contained in B, then mu of A is less than or equal to mu of B. So if
Yes.
mu of B is 0, then mu of A will be 0, because these are positive measures. Positive meaning non-negative. But there is a catch. That is why I paused here. But this need not be true for another reason. What is that? If A and B are measurable, and if A is contained in B, then mu A is less than or equal to mu B. But a subset of a set of measure 0, suppose B is a set of measure 0 and A is a subset of B. Can you say that mu of A is 0 always?
No, it should be measurable. Sir. Then.
It should be measurable. So a subset of a set of measure 0 will have measure 0 provided the subset is measurable. But it need
Yes.
not be part of your sigma algebra. But then you
Yes.
can say, why bother? Define that to be part of your sigma algebra and define this measure to be 0. You enlarge your sigma algebra. Okay, put these sets, so put subsets of sets of measure 0 also in your sigma algebra and enlarge your sigma algebra. This is okay, but then you have to check that this enlargement is actually a sigma algebra, right? If you if you take a sigma algebra and if you throw in some more sets, why should it be a sigma algebra? All those properties one will have to check. So this is what we are going to start with. So we are going to, given xm mu, we are going to consider this collection m star. So this is the largest set. What are the elements of this collection? All those sets of x which are sandwiched between two measurable sets. Okay. So E is sandwiched between A and B. But what is the property of A and B? A and B are measurable. E is any subset, but it contains a measurable set and contained in a measurable set. But that's not the point. That way, empty set is contained in everything and full set contains everything. That's not the point. The point is sandwich so that the difference between B and A is measure 0. If B and A are measurable, then B minus A is measurable and mu is a positive measure and mu of B minus A is 0. Consider this collection. Do you agree that this contains M? Is it clear that this contains M?
This contains.
Yes.
So if E belongs to M, what is your obvious choice of A and B?
A is equals to B equals to E.
A equal to E equal to B, in which case B minus A is empty set and mu of empty set is 0. So this clearly contains M. And our claim is, can you guess what the claim is? M star is?
Sigma algebra.
Sigma algebra. So can we verify? What is the first thing to verify to show that something is a sigma algebra? There are three conditions. No?
Countable
M.
elements.
Full
The whole
set is
set is
there. So full set is there because full set belongs to M and M is contained in M star. So
Yes.
full set is there. That's obvious. Next thing, if E belongs
Countable
there, then E
unions.
complement belongs there. So can you guess what should be, if E belongs there, there exists A and B with this condition. Can you suggest me the set contained in and containing for E complement, the obvious ones?
B complement and A complement.
Complement of a complement B complement.
Yeah, so E complement contains B complement and it is contained in A complement. And what is the difference of A complement minus B complement? What is A complement minus B complement? Just draw some pictures. What is your guess? I mean, what's the most obvious candidate that is true? This is just set theory. No? What is A complement minus B complement? So what is the meaning of A complement minus B complement? Something is in A complement and it is not in B complement, right? So something is in A complement mean it is not in A, and it is not in B complement meaning it is in B. So what is the obvious candidate? It is in B and it is not in A.
Yes. Not
So
B.
it is B minus A, and you check the other way
Okay.
also.
Same.
So it is same, and mu of B minus A is
Yes.
given to be 0, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that is also done. And for countable union, you can prove similarly, no? How will you prove it for countable union? Suppose union EI is there, and for each EI you have AI and BI. AI contained in EI contained in BI, and mu of BI minus AI is 0. For each I, you know that. So what are the obvious sets for union EI? What is a set contained in and what is a set containing? Take union AI and union BI and check
Yes.
what is the difference and what is the measure. That also you can show. Okay. So, and we are going to define the measure. So on this enlarged sigma algebra, you define the mu of E to be mu of A. But mu of A is same as mu of B, right?
Yes.
Because B minus A has measure 0. So this is the definition of measure. The claim is that M star is a sigma algebra and mu is a measure on M star. So first of all, mu is well defined. Because if E is if E is sandwiched between A and B and A prime and B prime, you have to show that mu of A equal to mu of A prime. But that is okay because you have A minus A prime contained in E minus A prime contained in B prime minus A prime. Why is this true? Because A is contained in E is contained in
B prime.
B prime, because B is, yeah, E is contained in B prime. Therefore, this is true. And from this, it follows that mu of A minus A prime is 0, right? Because mu of B prime minus A prime is 0. So mu of A minus A prime is 0. So what do you conclude from this? From this, you can conclude that mu of A is same as,
Mu of it is.
Mu of A prime.
well, A prime intersection A, right? Because A prime may not be contained inside A. So mu of A is mu of A intersection A prime. By a similar argument, you can show that mu of A prime is also mu of A prime intersection A. So this shows that it is well defined. and checking that it's a sigma algebra, we have already verbally checked all these things. And for union, you take union of AI and union of BI, and clearly A is contained in E is contained in B, and B minus A you need to check. But B minus A is same as union of BI minus A, no? Is that true? Because B is union of BI. Agree?
Yes.
And this is contained in union of BI minus AI, because A contains AI. Therefore, A complement is contained in AI complement. Agree?
So just one second.
And what is mu of BI minus AI is 0 for each I. Therefore, mu of the right hand side is 0, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And therefore, mu of B minus A is 0. So that shows that it's a sigma algebra. And suppose the EI is a disjoint, you have to show that this definition that we have given is a measure. But that's also easy. AIs are also disjoint if EI is a disjoint, no? Because AI is contained in EI. So AIs are also disjoint. And the mu of E is by definition mu of A. But mu of A is what? Because the AI is a disjoint.
Okay.
Mu of AI.
Summation of.
Mu of AI is same as mu of EI, no?
Yes.
That was the definition of EI. Therefore, mu is a measure. So what have we done? What we have done is, if you have a sigma algebra and a measure, but suppose a subset of measure 0 is not measurable. If you are in such a situation, you can add all those and enlarge the sigma algebra this way. And this sigma algebra will have the property that a subset of measure 0 is measurable and is of measure 0. This enlargement is what we call completion. Okay. So given a measure space, you can complete it. This is the definition of completion. M star is the completion, and there you can define mu like this, and that is a completed measure space. Okay. This is very similar to your completion of a metric space. Okay. So this is the definition of completion. This is called mu completion because mu is given to you measure. Okay. Now we are going to go ahead and do a corollary of DCT, dominated convergence theorem. And we will see, what all we are going to do now, we'll have this almost everywhere results. All that we are going to do is almost everywhere results now in the remaining part of this lecture. So what is given to you is a sequence of complex measurable functions, and these are all defined almost everywhere. Suppose they are defined everywhere also, even then your final result will be an almost everywhere result. Okay. So you need to assume only this much. They are defined almost everywhere on X. And this is the condition given, that integral of mod Fn, that summation is finite. Okay, this condition is given. And our claim is that this makes sense. This converges. Okay, summation Fnx converges. But I'm not claiming that this converges everywhere. It converges almost everywhere. Okay, it converges for almost all x. The set of places where it does not converge is a set of measures 0. This is our claim. So this will be a very useful result, right? Because whether a series converges or not is an important question. And at least almost everywhere convergence is guaranteed if you know this kind of a condition. Okay. So, and once this is true, we are also interested in the integral of f. And can you guess what the integral of f will be? Integral of f d mu is
Summation of integral.
summation of integral f and d mu. We are going to claim that f is an L1 and this is this. So the last part should be okay, right? Last part should be okay if we can prove this first part because we have interchanging. Okay, so let's do this. So what is our starting point? What is given to you? What is given to you is this condition together with the condition that fn's are defined almost everywhere. So let us take the collection of points where fn is defined. Okay, and we know something about that set. So let Sn be the set of points on which fn is defined. So what do you know about Sn? what is the measure theoretic property of Sn that you know? If this is the definition of Sn, what do you know about Sn? Measure theoretically.
Measurable.
Measure of?
This is measurable set on.
Sn is of course measurable because Fn is measurable. And but what do you know about the measure of Sn?
Measure of X.
Sn less than a measure of X.
That is always true because Sn is a subset of X. You know a bit more, no? Because what do you know about Fns? Fns are defined
Almost.
almost everywhere. So the places where Fn is not defined, what are the points where Fn is not defined in terms of
X
Sn?
minus Sn.
X minus Sn complement. And what is the measure of Sn complement?
0.
0. So measure of Sn is same as
Measure of X.
measure of X. Okay, so that you know. And consider, the intersection of all these Sn. Intersection you can always take, right, as n varies. Okay, so consider X in S. S is the intersection of Sn. So if X is in S, then what is the property of S? Each Fn is defined, right? At
Yes.
Sn, Fn is defined, and you are taking intersection. So each Fn is defined at X. Agree?
Yeah, correct.
And what do you know about S complement? S complement will be union of Sn complement, right?
Yes.
And measure of
Yes.
Sn complement is 0 for each n. Therefore, measure of S complement is also 0, no?
Yes.
So maybe you also know that measure of S complement is also 0. And we are going to take phi of X as summation mod Fnx. Okay? For X in S. For X in S, Fnx is defined. So you can take
Sir.
mod Fnx. Yeah. Is there a question?
Yes. Yes. Which defines the intersection of Sn. Can
Yes.
be implicit. Implicit.
Say that again.
S can be implicit.
I did
Sir,
not.
that's a S is empty set.
Oh, okay. So
You are taking intersection over Sn, and we don't know that Sn contained Sn plus 1 or not.
you don't know any such thing. You are just taking the intersection. So let us do one more step. Okay, let us do one more step. And no, but you know that it is non-empty. That's the question, right? S is non-empty. Is that the question?
Yes, sir. How
But I'm
can we show
saying
that?
that S is large. I'm saying that S is large because look at S complement. S complement is union of Sn complement, no?
And this is measure of 0.
And so measure of S complement is 0. So S is large. S is, not just non-empty. It is as big as X.
Yes.
Measure of S is same as measure of X. So that is okay. S is large. And for X in S, you agree? There's summation mod Fnx. Fnx is defined. So you can consider summation mod Fnx. But this may not be well defined, right? This may not be a finite value, no? Or is it?
Yes, sir. May not be.
May not be, but let us check. We are going to claim that under our hypothesis this is. Phi is a positive function, right?
Yes.
And for a positive function, you have interchanging. No, infinity may be allowed. You have interchanging, right? Integral you have interchanging. So take integral of phi. What is integral of phi? It is integral of summation, which is summation of integral of
Mod F.
mod Fn. But what do you know about that? What is given to you?
This is finite.
That is finite. Therefore, integral of phi is finite. If integral of phi is finite, then you know that phi is finite, no? Well, you know that phi is finite almost everywhere. Agree? Because if phi is infinity on a non-measure zero set, then integral of phi cannot be finite, right?
Yes.
So you know that so we have interchanging, and therefore this is finite, and this implies that if you consider this set E to be those points in S where phi is finite, what do you know about this set? You know that the complement of this has measure 0. Because if the complement did not have measure 0, and if you are getting infinity there, then the integral will be infinity. Right? 0 in infinity is 0 for us, but any non-zero number times infinity is of course infinity, right?
Yes. Yes.
And therefore you conclude that mu of S minus E is 0. I'm interested not in S minus E, I'm interested in X minus E. I'm interested in the complement of E in X. What do you know about the measure of that set, X minus E?
X minus.
X minus E is X
Zero.
minus S union S minus E, no? Agree?
Yes.
And
Yes.
S minus E, the measure is 0, we have concluded. And X minus S, what is the measure? That also we had concluded earlier.
Again,
No?
zero.
Again 0. Therefore, measure of X minus E is 0. Agree?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the situation that we are in. We have got, so given condition is crucially used here. What the condition given is crucially used here. And what do we need to prove? We need to prove that F equal to summation Fn. That makes sense almost everywhere. And let us do that. So what you have is mod Fx is less than or equal to phi x, right? Because phi x is this summation. And what is F? F is summation Fn. So by triangle inequality applied to partial sums, mod F is less than or equal to phi, right? Triangle inequality applied to partial sums, and therefore F belongs to L1 mu because phi is in L1 mu. Okay. And now you take the partial sums Gn to be F1 plus etc. plus Fn. And then what is Fx? Fx is summation Fnx. So what is F in terms of Gn?
Limit of Gn.
Limit of Gn. And are Gn's dominated by an L1 function?
Gn.
Gn's are dominated by phi, right? And phi is an L1. So Gn converges to F on E, and on E only all these things are defined. And on E, the Gn's are also dominated by phi. And therefore you can apply dCt, and what will you get? Integral of F is integral of limit Gn, which is limit of integral Gn, right? Agree? This is summation integral of integral of F is integral of limit Gn, which is limit of integral of Gn. But integral of Gn is finite sum integral Fn, right? Finite sum integral Fn is integral of Gn. So what is the limit? It's an infinite sum of integral of Fn. So is this statement okay? What is displayed? This is dCt. Is this step okay? Integral of F is integral of limit Gn, which is limit of integral Gn by dCt. But integral Gn is integral F1 plus etc. plus integral Fn. So what is the limit? That is integral F1 plus etc. plus integral Fn is the nth partial sum of what is written on the right hand side, right? So an infinite series is limit of partial sum. So this is dCt. Is there a question? Is this step?
Sir,
Yeah.
where you have defined F, sir?
F is in the very statement. F is this.
Oh, limit of.
Summation Fn is called F. The question is it well defined, etc. And our claim is it converges almost all x. Okay,
Yes.
so F is summation Fn.
Okay.
Okay, so that is why we took this Gn to be partial sums, and so integral of, so F is limit Gn, right? F is limit gn. Integral of f will be limit of integral gn, which is the right hand side. Now mu of x minus c is 0. Therefore, integral of f d mu over x is same as integral over f d mu over e, which is this, which is same as this. Okay. So you have got this formula for integral f. Now the only question is, where did we prove that? Did we prove this, that this integral, this summation converges at almost all x? Where did we prove this? Can you point to the slide? Point to the line in the slide where we actually proved this?
Yes, sir. Where we have proved that it's satisfied on E.
Yes. So we have proved that this is nothing but limit of gn, right?
Yes.
And we proved that gn converges to f, which is same as saying fx is summation fn x, no? This is same as saying gn converges to f, right? And we proved that gn converges to f on E. We proved that gn converges to f on E here. Gn converges to f on E. Okay.
Yes.
And that means almost everywhere gn converges to f, because we have shown that E complement has measure 0. Okay.
Yes.
And once this is there, you can interchange the limit and integral by dct. Okay, so this is a useful result, and the remark here is convergence of the series of f is guaranteed only almost everywhere, even if all the fn's were defined everywhere. See, fn in this theorem, in this result, fn's were defined only almost everywhere, and we proved that convergence of f is almost everywhere. But even if fn's were defined everywhere, your proof will give convergence only almost everywhere, because only on E you are getting convergence. See, because fn's are defined almost everywhere, you argued with the set S. But suppose this S is equal to X. Everywhere fn's is defined. Even then you have to consider this E, and you still have X minus E. Can be non-empty. E may not be the whole of X. Even if S is whole of X, E may not be all of X. Okay. So even if, so this is just a remark that even if fn's are defined everywhere, that means S equal to X, our end result that the summation converges almost everywhere, there you cannot say everywhere for sure. There you get only almost everywhere. Is that point clear? Because it is not on S that we are saying convergence is guaranteed. It is on a subset of S, which we call E, that convergence is guaranteed.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a remark. And let us do a few more observations, which all will have almost everywhere. So my next 2 or 3 slides will have observations. The last line will say, will assert something only almost everywhere, not everywhere. Okay, let us see some such examples. So f is a measurable function, positive. E is a measurable set, and integral of f over E is 0. What should be the conclusion? Intuitively, what do you feel is the conclusion? We will prove it.
Suppose
I'm saying that it has to be an almost everywhere conclusion. So what is your almost everywhere conclusion?
F is
F is
0
zero
almost
alpha.
everywhere.
Almost everywhere on which set?
E.
On E, correct. So f is 0. So the conclusion is f is 0 almost everywhere on E. Okay, this is what you would guess, and you can rigorously prove this. You take those points where fx is strictly bigger than 1 by n, call it an, and then integral f d mu is given to be 0, and integral over f d mu. So E contains an, therefore this is true, right? Because f is positive function, because E contains an. And on an, what do you know about f? You know that
F
fx
is
is bigger than
rectangular.
1 by n. So you get this is bigger than or equal to 1 by n of integral of 1, which is mu of an. Agree? And from this, what can you conclude? Mu of an is
mu of an are 0.
Zero.
Mu of an is 0. An's are measurable, no?
Yes.
An's are measurable because f is measurable, and therefore mu of an is 0. And if you consider the collection of x where fx is strictly positive, that is union of an, right? If fx is strictly bigger than 0, then it will have to be bigger than 1 by n for some n, no?
Yes.
So this set is same as union of an, and each an has measure 0. Therefore, the left hand side has measure 0. But that's what we wanted to prove, right? We wanted to show that f is 0 almost everywhere, meaning the points where f is strictly bigger than 0 has measure 0. But that's what we have just proved.
Yes.
All of you agree with this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that is the proof. Next statement is that now f is a complex valued function. Okay. F is a complex valued function, and but it is given to be L1 mu. What is the meaning of L1 mu? Integral of Integral of- integral of mod f is finite. Okay. And if integral of mod f is finite, then of course integral of f is also finite, right? Because modulus of integral is less than or equal to integral of modulus. And what is given to you is integral f d mu over e is 0 for every e. What should be the conclusion?
For every e.
Conclusion should be
F is zero.
Again,
Almost
f equal to
everywhere
0.
on X.
f is 0
Everywhere on
Almost everywhere on X.
almost everywhere
X.
on the whole x.
Yes.
Because on every e this is true. Okay. So this is what we are going to show, but it's a complex function. So write it as u plus iv, where u and v are real valued functions, and then you will write u as u plus minus u minus and v as v plus minus v minus. And consider the collection of points where ux is non-negative. Okay. Now, do you agree that 0 is real part of integral f d mu over this set E? Because
Yes.
integral f d mu is 0, right?
The real part.
Therefore, it's real part of 0 for every E, in particular for this E. Yeah? Because
Yes.
integral of f d mu is 0, real part of that is also 0. So this is okay. But you are taking this particular E. So what can you conclude? What will be my next inequality? F is u plus iv. And this is the real part of integral of f. So that is same as integral over u, no? Right?
Yes.
This is integral over u, but that is same as integral over u plus. Why? This is same as integral over u, but that is same as integral over u plus. Why is that? Because E is all those places where u is positive.
Correct.
Okay. So u minus will not play a role here. Because here u minus is 0, right? So this is integral over u plus. But u plus is a positive function. So if integral of u plus d mu is 0, what is the conclusion about u plus? Because for positive functions, we already proved something, no?
U plus is almost.
U plus is
U
zero.
plus is 0 almost everywhere on E. Okay. And this implies u plus is 0 almost everywhere on X. Why is that? Why is that?
Because it is true for every e.
Because outside E, what is u plus? Outside E, what is u? U plus is 0, no? See, what is u plus? U plus is maximum of
Maximum of ux comma 0.
0, comma.
u and 0, right? And if u plus is 0 almost everywhere on E, and outside E, u is negative, right? Outside E, u is negative. So u plus will be 0. So outside E, u plus is 0. So if u plus is 0 almost everywhere on E, then you can conclude u plus is 0 almost everywhere on X from the definition of E. Okay. Similarly, you can show u minus v plus v minus everything is 0 almost everywhere on x. You may have to argue with imaginary part or something like that. But a similar argument will show all these are 0 almost everywhere on x, and therefore integral of f is 0. Therefore, f is 0 almost everywhere on x. Okay, so that this is 0 for every e is used because you argued with this kind of an e, and as u changes, e can change. So for every e is used in this proof. Okay, so this is our second result on almost everywhere, and now I am copy pasting my one slide from my last lecture. Can you guess what this slide is? Page 14. I think there were 17 slides. I mean, this is not a maths question. This is just a memory question. Can you guess what this result is? Just for fun, I am asking. You don't have, I mean, if you don't answer, you know, that doesn't mean anything.
Yes, belong L1.
So the very last thing that we did is DCT, right? And I think there were 17 or 18 slides. So the very last was DCT. So this is just before DCT. Do you recall what did we do just before DCT? After Fatus Lemma, but before DCT. This we had to use in the proof of DCT.
Mod fx
Yeah, modulus of integralus
less than integral
less
of
than or equal to integral of the modulus. So I will not go through it because we did this last time, but this is exactly that slide. Okay. Now, the last observation that we want to do is, suppose you had an equality here instead of an inequality. What can you conclude? That is the next slide. But let us reverse engineer this. Suppose it is an equality here instead of an inequality. What can you say in the previous step? If this is an equality, then you are getting that integral of modulus of f equal to this, which all the way is equal to this, right? With the same definition of u. You are getting integral of modulus of f equal to integral of u. Out of u and mod f, which is bigger? Which is bigger?
Mod f.
Mod f is bigger. So in order to get a positive function, what is the difference that you will consider? Mod f minus u.
Mod f minus.
And what do you know about integral of mod f minus u? Because of the equality here,
both are same.
integral of mod f minus u is 0.
0.
And mod f minus u is a positive function. And therefore, what is the conclusion? Mod f minus u is 0 almost everywhere on E. Almost everywhere on E. So mod f is equal to u almost everywhere on E, right? So you are getting equality here almost everywhere. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So what you are getting is equality here almost everywhere. But if u equal to mod alpha f, and u is real part of alpha f, right? U is real part of alpha f. So what you are getting is real part of alpha f equal to modulus of alpha f. Suppose you have a function g and you are getting that the real part of g equal to modulus of g. What is the conclusion about the imaginary part?
0.
0, right? So if this is equality is almost everywhere, then the imaginary part is 0 is also almost everywhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So what you are getting is imaginary part is 0 almost everywhere. So what you have concluded is alpha f, what you have concluded is alpha f equal to real part of alpha f almost everywhere. Yeah. So in other words, what you have got is, so let us just write in the way that we want. So this argument gives you alpha f equal to real part of alpha f equal to mod alpha f, which is mod f. Okay. So what you have proved is, if you have equality here, by reverse engineering the previous proof, you are getting that there exists an alpha of modulus 1 such that alpha f is mod f. This is the conclusion. Forget this middle part. The conclusion is, if you have this identity, if you have equality here, then there exists an alpha, modulus of alpha is 1, such that alpha f is mod f. So that's a good result, right? For a complex number, we always know that there exists an alpha such that alpha z is mod z. And right? And for a measurable, positive measurable function also, we proved such a thing, no?
Yes.
There exists an alpha, mod alpha is 1 such that alpha f is mod f, right? Do you remember this proof?
Yes, sir.
You know, if f was never 0, we just took mod f by f. Otherwise, you know, what did we do? We used a particular set and appropriated with a characteristic function, not a complex number alpha. There it was a measurable function alpha with mod equal to 1. Agree? We showed that there exists an alpha measurable mod alpha is 1 such that alpha f is mod f. This we did in the very first lecture or second lecture. Okay. This is different. This statement is that there is a complex number alpha. This alpha is a complex number. This complex number is exactly this complex number which is coming here. This one. Okay. So, but here f is an L1 mu and this extra condition is given that these two are equal. If these two are equal, there is a complex number alpha modulus is 1 such that alpha f is mod f. Almost everywhere. Okay. So this is another almost everywhere result. I hope we have time. I want to do two important results now. Very, very important results. What is the time now? We have time. We have half an hour and we can do both. So both are important. This result, I don't think there is a name. Rudin doesn't give a name and I'm not sure whether there is a name. And therefore, I have given this name in order to remember this, that averages on finite spaces. What is an average? What do you mean by average?
If we have n quantities, then take sum of all that and divide by number
Correct.
of times.
So if you have a finite number of quantities, you take the sum of all, finite number of numbers, you take the sum of all that and divide by the total, right? Divide by, not the total, divide by the number of numbers, right? But suppose you think that, you know, you are on natural numbers and you are doing this, and suppose you think that you have the counting measure. Yeah. And if you have a finite set, then n is the total measure, no, of the space, right? So if you have x1 plus etc. plus xn divided by n, the denominator n is the total measure, right? If you know, if your measure is counting measure. And what is x1 plus etc. plus xn in terms of the counting measure? What is that? It is? Yeah, it is summation xn, but what is summation xn in terms of counting measure? It's an integral of a particular function, right? It's the integral of the function. So what is a function? Function takes values. So you take the set 1, 2, etc. n, and function takes values. F of 1 is x1, f of 2 is x2, etc. If you consider that function, then the integral of f is summation xn, no? Is that correct? Anyway, summation is integral with respect to counting measure. Okay. So average, more generally, what is an average? Even in calculus, what is an average of a function? You integrate over your space and divide by the total volume. That is average, right? And dividing by total volume makes sense because the total volume is finite. So that's why I'm saying finite space. So finite space is a space with measure finite. Total measure is finite. So that you can take the average. If f is an L1 mu, then you can define the average to be this. Integral f d mu is finite because f is an L1 mu, and division by mu e makes sense because mu e is finite. Mu e is finite because mu x is finite. Agree? Okay, so the result is the following. Suppose you take a closed set and complex plane. Okay, and suppose f is such that these averages are in your closed set that you have chosen. The averages belong to S for every measurable set with positive measure. positive, strictly positive measure. Okay. So only strictly positive measure you can take 1 by mu e. No, if mu e is 0, that doesn't make sense. So wherever average makes sense, you take the average. And suppose all these averages belong to S. Do you want to guess what am I going to conclude about the function f? Make a good guess. The claim is going to be, an assertion is about the function f, the values of the function f. Values of f are complex, right? Complex numbers. And where are these values going to be? That is what the assertion is. You want to make a good guess? The averages belong to S. Take a real valued function and take a closed set, take a closed interval, let us say closed interval 1, 2. F is real valued and all the averages belong to closed interval 1 and 1 to 2. Averages are bigger than 1 and less than 2. What can you conclude about F? I'm not saying it is certainly true, but suppose the world was good, suppose everything was nice. What are the obvious functions for which the average is bigger than 1 and less than 2? Can you give me obvious functions for which when you take the average, it is bigger than 1 and less than 2?
Constant
No, total
function.
measure is finite. Total measure is finite. That is given to you. Mu of R is finite.
Constant function on the interval, between the intervals. Balloon having between the intervals.
What is your constant value?
Between the intervals.
Suppose it is constant function 1000.
No, sir. Function value should be between the interval.
Okay. So you are saying if you take functions which are valued between 1 and 2, it need not be constant function, no? It can be any function, but suppose it is bounded above by 2 and bounded below by 1. That's enough for your argument, no?
Yes. Also right.
Right? If it is bounded above by 2, then integral of f is less than twice the integral, but twice the integral is 2 only, no? Because the total measure you will get divided by the total measure, that cancels, so you will get 2, right? And similarly bounded below by 1, so you will get that the integral is above 1. Agree?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So the obvious functions for which the averages belong to a given set are functions whose value belong to the given set.
Correct. Yes.
Now if the world was good, you would conclude the converse, right? If the averages belong to the set, you would like to conclude that the values belong to the set.
Yes.
But such a thing need not be true, no? Because from integral you can conclude only about the function only almost everywhere, right? Because integral doesn't see measure 0 sets.
Yeah.
So what
correct.
should be the conclusion of this slide?
Almost.
Yeah.
Agree.
Conclusion is, if this is true, then if everything is good, we claim that fx belongs to S for almost all x. So it's going to be a very, very useful theorem. And it's easy, but it's very, very important. And this will be, remember this result on averages on finite spaces. We will construct a particular finite space and we will conclude something about averages and then conclude about the function values in the proof of Radon-Nikodym theorem. As I told you, it's a very important theorem of this course. And this particular result on averages will play a very crucial role in Rudin's proof of Radon-Nikodym theorem. Okay. So at that time, I will stop and ask you to give the proof and you should remember this result. Okay. Agree?
Okay, sir.
It's a promise. Okay. It's a promise that you're giving me that at a particular point in Radon-Nikodym theorem, I will stop and ask you to continue and you should continue using this result. This will come much later after mixing. Okay. Let us prove this result. So how will you prove this result? You have to show that fx belongs to S for almost all x. So what is the result about? The result is going to be about the complement of S is a closed set, right? And you're going to show that fx belongs to S for almost all x. So where are we going to assert that measure is 0? Which set measure is 0? We have to prove that a certain set has measure 0. What is that set which should have measure 0?
S complement.
Not S complement. S complement is
F
in
inverse.
S complement is
F
in
inverse
C.
S complement.
F inverse
F
of
inverse
S
S complement.
complement. F inverse of S complement, right? F inverse of S complement consists of those points where fx is outside S. So that should have measure 0. So F inverse of x minus S is what we are interested in. Agree?
Yes, sir.
And x minus S is open or not x minus S, C minus S. F inverse of C minus S, right? S is a subset of C. So complement meaning C minus S.
Yes.
Agree?
It's closed.
C minus S, topologically, what is C minus S? Is it open or is it closed, or can you say something?
Open.
Open. C minus S is open because S is closed. And therefore, can you write C minus S as a countable union of nice closed set? Any open set can be written as a countable union of closed balls, no? In Euclidean spaces. I think one of you, some disturbance is coming. Maybe unless you are asking a question, you can all mute. Yeah, please mute yourself. There's a lot of disturbance on my side also. But do you agree that C minus S can be written as a countable union of closed balls with some center and some radius? This can be
Yes.
done, no? Yeah. So, in order to show that F inverse of C minus S is of measure 0, it's enough to show that if you take a closed ball in C minus S, its inverse image has measure 0. Because then finally you can write C minus S as a countable union of these things, and F inverse of a union will be union of F inverse, and that will prove the result. Agree? So you need to show this, but this can be written as a countable union of, so what is my notation? B bar of alpha R, it is the closed disk with center alpha and radius R. So it can be written as a countable union like this. Therefore, it's enough to show that F inverse of B bar alpha R, call it E, and you have to show that mu of E is 0. Okay? This is what you have to show. What is given to you? What is the hypothesis? Hypothesis is averages are
Inside S.
inside S. For all E, right? Not for all E. For what kind of E it is given to you? For what kind of E averages are inside S?
Positive measure.
Positive measure. So we have to show that for this E, mu E is 0. Suppose not. Suppose mu E is not 0. Then mu E is positive, no? And if mu E is positive, then you can use what is given to you. Averages belong to? Average belongs to?
Yes.
S. So suppose not. Suppose mu E is positive. You can consider the average. And I am interested in modulus of average minus alpha. This alpha and R are fixed. Okay. So these are all easy proofs, but these are all very ingenious proofs. You should remember to start correctly. So average minus alpha modulus, what will be my next step? What will come in the very next line? Average, you apply the definition of average, right? What is the definition of average? 1 by mu E, integral of f d mu over E.
FD.
But alpha also you can write as an integral, no? Alpha is same as integral over E of alpha is same as alpha times 1, and 1 is mu E by mu E. So alpha can be written as alpha times integral of 1 d mu over E by mu E. Agree? Therefore, this difference is, because integral is a linear transformation, this difference is 1 by mu E times modulus of integral of f minus alpha.
Yes.
Agree? Because mu E is positive, it comes out. Okay. but E is this set. E is not arbitrary. E is this set. So what do you know about f of E? F of E belongs to the closed disk alpha comma R. So f of x minus alpha, because x is in E, what do you know about f of x minus alpha?
Less than equal to R.
Less than or equal to R. So by that bound, this is, first of all, modulus is less than or equal to integral of the modulus, and mod f minus alpha is less than or equal to R, and therefore this is less than or equal to R, because mu e and mu e cancels. Do you agree? All of you agree with the last step? This is, whenever
Yes.
x belongs to E, this is less than or equal to R. So R is a bound which comes out, rest is integral d mu, that is mu of E, which cancels with this mu of E. So you get less than or equal to R. But look at this. What you have shown is the average of f over E minus alpha is less than or equal to R. That means the average belongs to this ball, no?
P alpha.
But can average belong to that ball?
No.
Because average is given
Average in S.
in S, whereas this is outside S. So this is a contradiction, and contradiction is because mu e is positive. So you have shown what you wanted to show. So it's very easy. Okay, so the proof is easy, but it's an important observation. From averages, you are concluding something about function values, but of course you will expect to conclude only almost everywhere, and therefore you are concluding only almost everywhere. And this is a very, very important observation which will play a crucial role in the proof of Radon-Nikodym theorem, and maybe in many other places. Okay. And the next one is what is called the Borel-Cantelli lemma, which you have seen in MSc. And why have I
Yes.
given bio detail only about Cantelli and not about Borel? What do you think? See, whenever names come, I give birth year and death year, and I think Cantelli is Italian. And why do I give only for Cantelli and not for Borel?
That you have already given for Borel.
Because I have already given for Borel when we introduced Borel sigma algebra. Okay. But yesterday I was checking where all I gave names, and I think I have given wherever names came, I have given this except for one very important person. You know who I missed?
Lebesgue.
Lebesgue I have missed. Okay.
Yes.
Lebesgue is
The
so
main
much
part,
there
the
that I
main part of
missed
the
Lebesgue. Hmm?
the main part of the thing, sir.
Yeah, the main person I missed. So let it be so. Okay, because I already missed. And now it's not good to show Lebesgue. Lebesgue should have come in lecture 2 or lecture 1 itself. Anyway, let's take the Borel-Cantelli lemma. So the crucial point in the last lecture was the space was finite, right? Only then you could take average. Agree? So here also finiteness plays a role. There is a finiteness condition, but not on the total space. Total space can be infinite, not a problem. Measure can be infinite, total volume can be infinite, but there's another finiteness condition. You should remember that what is given to you is a sequence of measurable set En, and the finiteness condition is this. Do you recall the Borel-Cantelli lemma? Those of you who have seen it, this is the assumption. Then there is a conclusion. What is given is a sequence of measurable set En, not ascending, descending, nothing like that, but the sum of the measures is given to be finite. Measure of x need not be finite. But if measure of x is finite, then this is automatic, no? No, even then it's not automatic, right? Even then this could be infinity, right? Even if measure of x is finite, this could be infinity. So what is given is this summation, this sum is finite. And the conclusion is, the lemma asserts that this is a very, very important result in dynamical systems, ergodic theory, all kinds of areas of maths. It's a very useful lemma, very simple lemma, but very, very useful lemma. The lemma asserts that almost every x, as I said, today every result is almost everywhere. Almost every x, if you recall, can you tell me the conclusion? Question is, does x belong to En?
Only finitely many Yes.
Yeah, at most finitely many ENs. So almost every X lie in at most finitely many EN. This is the Borel-Cantelli lemma. So just digest the lemma. If some hypothesis, some finiteness, appropriate finiteness hypothesis given, and then you take an X, and the question is, can X belong to infinitely many ENs? And the answer is no. Almost always the X that you pick, that belongs to only finitely many En, at most finitely many En. It may not belong to any En, and it cannot belong to infinitely many En. But there may be X which belong to infinitely many En. What do you know about those X which belong to infinitely many En? What do you know about that set? The set of all those X
Measure
which
zero.
belong, that is of measure zero. Okay, this is Borel-Cantelli lemma. So what should we look at in order to prove this? You should look at the set of all X which belong to infinitely many En, right?
Oh, yes.
And you have to show that that set has measure
0.
0. So how will you phrase nicely the set of all X which belong to infinitely many ENs? We will come to that later. Maybe we have a better proof. There's another proof in the exercise which requires that phrasing. So we have to prove, we need to consider those X which belong to En for infinitely many n. This much all of you agree, right? And what should be the claim? Mu of
A is zero.
mu of
Mu
A
of
is,
A.
we have to show that mu of A is 0, and we are going to consider gx to be this function summation chi En as n going from 1 to infinity. Okay, chi En of x, what are the two possible values?
0.
0 or 1. So if x is an En for infinitely many n, what is the value of g?
Infinite.
G will be infinite, right? G will be infinite. And if x is in En only for finitely many values, then G will be finite. So G captures that notion of x in En for infinitely many n or not. And what's the meaning of x belongs to A in terms of the function G? Is exactly what we just said. X belongs to A if and only if Gx is
G is infinite.
Gx is infinite. Okay. And by interchanging, what is the integral of G? Interchanging is applicable, no? Because chi and are positive functions. Whenever you have positive functions, interchanging is there by MCT. So integral of G is
Summation of integral of x.
some integral of summation with a summation of integral.
Yes.
And what is integral of chi En?
Union of
Measure of
summation,
Measure
summation
of
of
En. So what you get is integral of G d mu is summation of measure of En, and what is given to us in Borel-Cantelli lemma hypothesis?
ENs are finite.
summation is
This is
finite.
finite. Agree? This is given to you. So what is the conclusion? Integral of G d mu is given to be finite. And integral of G d mu over all of x is given to be finite. And how do you compare integral of G d mu over x and integral of G d mu over A?
Integral over A is less than
So it follows that integral of G d mu over A is finite, right? That is a subset. And if integral of G d mu over A is finite, then mu of A has to be 0, no? Because if mu of A is positive, then integral G d mu over A G is infinity. So you will get a positive number times infinity, which will become infinity. So that this is finite forces mu of A to be 0, which is what you wanted to prove. So the proof is interchanging. So proof is MCT. Okay. So mu of A is 0. This is what we wanted to prove. But now let me just reformulate. The result is proved. Borel-Cantelli is already proved. But this set A in terms of En using set theoretic notations, can you write A? That is a question. Can you write A using unions and intersections? This fact in plain English, x belongs to En for infinitely many n's. Can you use using only set theoretic notations and no English. How will you write it? So X belongs to En for infinitely many n.
There exists n.
Huh?
There exists n such that.
Yeah, but there exists also English. I want only unions and intersections. So do you agree that X belongs to union of En and going from 1 to infinity? Of course, right? Because X belongs to En for infinitely many n. X belongs to En for one n is enough for it to belong to union, no? So you agree that X belongs to E1 union, E2 union, etc., right?
Yes.
Do you agree that X belongs to E2 union, E3 union, etc.? I have skipped E1 now.
Yes.
Do you agree that X belongs to E3 union, E4 union, etc.?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree that X belongs to EK? Please mute. Okay, then I am also asking you to answer. So do you agree that X belongs to EK union, EK plus 1 union, etc.?
Yes.
And so we are agreeing this for every K, right?
Yes.
So that means X belongs, if X belongs to A, X belongs to intersection over K of union En, K going
Union going from K to infinity.
K to infinity. Intersection of N going from 1 to infinity of union K, union I going from K to infinity. Agree?
Yes.
Union starting from K to infinity of an index and over that index 1 to infinity intersection. And the other way also you can show. If X belongs to that, so the remark is if you consider union N going from K to infinity of En and intersection of K going from 1 to infinity, that is exactly the set that we have considered, right? So some people will state Borel-Cantelli by saying that mu of this set is 0. Okay, do you know what this set is called? This set has a name. In terms of
Lim
En,
sup, I guess.
yeah, this is a lim sup of En as n going to infinity. And why is this called lim sup? Because you are taking supremum. This is like supremum, no? So union En from K onwards contains union En from K plus 1 onwards, right? So this is exactly the property of supremum, no? If you take supremum over a bigger set and supremum over a smaller set, you have monotonic decreasing. This is exactly that set. So this is like, so union is like supremum. Union from K to infinity is like supremum of n bigger than or equal to K. And then you are taking intersection, which is like infimum. So if union is like supremum, infimum is intersection, you are taking supremum from K onwards and infimum over all K, and that is exactly the definition of lim sup. Similarly, you have the definition of lim inf. Lim inf will be intersection here and union here. What is Borel-Cantelli? Borel-Cantelli says that if you have that particular finiteness condition, summation mu of En is finite, then what is the assertion in terms of this language? Mu of lim sup is 0. That's another way of stating Borel-Cantelli. So Borel-Cantelli says that mu of lim sup is 0. That may be a more memorable way of stating it, right? I don't know which one is more memorable. I think this is more memorable. Measure of lim sup is 0. Okay, so this is my last slide. We can stop the lecture here. So let me stop sharing this. Sorry, sharing the screen. And yeah, Akshay was not there at the very starting of the class, no?
No, sir. I am in class from very starting.
Yeah, very starting meaning when I started, when I was having chit chat, you were not there. As soon as maybe we started the class, you must have joined. I didn't see you in the video. Some people have left the class maybe in between. I don't see everybody here now.
During the class, I think there were only 4 students, sir. This day.
Speak up. I think it's not fully audible. You have to increase the volume.
Sir, I am saying that during the whole class, almost whole class, there were only 4 students.
Oh, okay. So others were not there. Okay, fine, fine. So maybe today everybody did not come. That's okay. So Hari Prasad is there, Shivakumar is there, Krishna is there. Mohit told me he won't come. So who else is not there today? Suraj Panikjahi is not there. I'm just trying to remember the names. It's okay if people don't come. Suraj Panikjahi is not there. Don't tell me. Let me get the names. Akshay is there, Hariprasad is there, Shivakumar is there, Krishna is there, Mohit will not come. And Suraj Panigrahi and Manoj Patel is not there. And so 5. And one more person, I should get the name. Manoj and Suraj and who's the other person in the class? All of you got it? Suraj Panigrahi, Manoj Patel, Akshay, Hariprasad, Shivakumar, Krishna, Mohit. Who's the fourth person? Who's that?
Samarendra,
Huh?
Samarendra something.
Samarendra. Yeah, of course I know him well. Immediately the name did not. Yeah. Okay, Samarendra. Good. Okay, so any other question or comment? Okay, then let's stop now. It's 12:30, and we will meet on Friday with chapter 2 of Odin. Please read and come. It's you need a lot of preparation. Read and come. The most important theorem that we have to do is called the Rees representation theorem. This is not the Rees representation theorem, which is easy, which is in Hilbert spaces. This is the tougher Rees representation theorem in measure theory.
Yes, sir.
So we will do same Rees, I think. There are two famous Rees, Marshall Rees and M Rees and F Rees. I forget which Rees this is. I will double check. I think it's the same Rees of Rees representation theorem in Hilbert spaces. I will double check. I have forgotten all this. And then we will do this. We will not do this in the next lecture. It will take some time. But anyway, so you can all leave and then I will quit at the end. Okay, so bye for now.
Bye.
Yeah, see you on Friday.